Hi, everybody. We're at CBS Radio for kind of a different first look for this Tuesday. This is Harley Carnes, who's working on a newscast over on the radio side of things. And we were just curious what you all were working on today.
Well, we've looked at your list so we can find out what to do.
Oh, sure, Harley.
Well, we're looking at Iraq, of course. I mean, we've got a big kidnapping. You've got 45 or 50 people taken hostage. And evidently some of the police officers who are there to protect people are among those arrested, at least 5 of them. So we're looking at that. We've got wildfire dangers, of course. Some people saying, some ecologists are saying that, global warming may make things worse in years to come.
Well, that's nothing new, right?
No, that's nothing new. Global warming makes everything worse, according to the experts.
Right. You sound skeptical about that, Harley.
I'm skeptical about most crystal balls.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we look into our future and we figure out, we think that we know so much about what's going to happen, and then we get there and we look back and we go, wow, we weren't right.
But sometimes when you do ignore things, you do so at your own peril. And most scientific researchers and experts do agree that global warming is real, contrary to what some people say, that it's not even an agreement within the scientific community, because it is, in fact, something that all the major scientists agree on. I guess it's what should be done about it and how quickly it's happening is a source of disagreement, but...
Makes all the sense in the world to have a clean world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes all the sense in the world to breathe clean air. And we have to argue about whether or not we should do that.
Obviously, when we're picking some good stories, oftentimes we'll say there's some great video of this.
Sure.
So we need to do it. And I'm just curious, as you all develop your roster of stories, what things you keep in mind, because good video doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to you all.
Well, it doesn't. And the interesting thing is we have so much at our beck and call. I mean, there are hundreds of stories in the computer. And in 5 minutes' time, how many can I do? I mean, we can do 5, 6, 7, maybe if we get in a hurry, 8 stories in that 5 minutes. So the answer is, I think, what stories resonate most, we think, with the people who are listening. Which stories matter? I once worked for a news director who had a big sign on the wall that said, "Who cares?" And the question was, who cares about the story? And if the answer was no one, then we'd probably not want to do the story.
Right.
So I guess that's the first thing that most of us think about. Some things are obvious. You're not going to ignore the election.
Right.
You're not going to ignore a tragedy of any sort. So some things are going to happen, and you're going to be doing those stories, but it's those back-of-the-book stories, those other things that reach out and touch people, those medical stories sometimes, that fill out the newscast and let people know that you do care about the life and the world they're in.
Now to give you all a little background on the history, the really rich history of CBS News, Kaye is the executive producer over here, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the history. Okay, Charlie, you're on.
First of all, you are standing where Walter Cronkite sat when he anchored the CBS Evening News.
I can't believe that. That is so wild, Charlie.
This was a television newsroom, and it was next to a very large joint radio television newsroom that stretched a football field down that way, halfway to Kansas. And Cronkite worked here throughout the course of the day on a typewriter, typed his newscast, then sat just about there when he actually went on television in the evening.
And so what was in the background when he sat? It was...
there's a big map of the world behind this wall covering here.
Uh-huh.
And we've uncovered a little bit of it.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Vietnam, Southeast Asia, from the Cronkite era, a rather important part of the world then. And when radio moved into this facility in 1987, we didn't know it was there. There had been another wall covering, and we cut a window to build a radio studio. And it was only then that we found out what we had, so we subsequently uncovered a little bit of the map.
That's great.
And put it there. And if you have a second, I'll show you a photograph of Walter Cronkite with that map in the background. Can you see that?
Oh, there. Oh, that's so great.
So there he is.
With his Smith Corona.
The Smith Corona. Can you remember the sounds of typewriters and teletype machines in newsrooms?
I can. When I started out, they used teletype machines, and I used to change the ribbon.
Oh, yes.
So they'd have these little white gloves
Yep.
for all the desk
Yep.
assistants at
Yep.
ABC News, and I would change the ribbon, and God,
Yeah.
That was a while ago, Charlie, but it doesn't seem that long
It was
ago,
a week or
does
two
it?
ago. And not only that, in some newsrooms, they had carbon paper between copies on the teletype paper.
We had that too.
Yeah, so the desk assistants would have to roll up the carbon paper and throw it out. And at the end of the day, everything needed a dry cleaning.
Yeah, it was quite a messy enterprise, that's for sure.
And you'd listen for bells throughout the course of the day. 4 bells would mean an urgent story was crossing on a wire, and 5 bells would mean a bulletin was crossing on a wire, and 10 bells was a flash, and that was the end of the world, if you ever heard that. So people would rush to the teletype machines to take a look at it.
But tell us a little bit about radio itself. Obviously, it's impressive that Walter Cronkite did the news from here, but before television existed, CBS radio was so important.
Yes, it was. The whole history of broadcast journalism in America goes back to CBS News and the very first radio programs. Ed Murrow, a young guy hired by William Paley to go to Europe and try to find interesting people to talk on the radio, kept sending messages back to New York saying something is happening here in Europe. This was the 1930s. This guy Hitler is causing a lot of problems. Let's watch him. Let's keep an eye on him. And he wanted to do programming to that, and the folks in New York were not too receptive to that. Then in
Typical.
Right. Then in 1938, Hitler invaded Austria, and Murrow continued to badger William Paley, and finally Paley said, okay, we'll do one newscast. Really, there had not been such a thing as a newscast on the radio before then. We'll do one newscast.
So what was there if there weren't newscasts?
There were commentators. There were people who offered their opinion on the news. There were staff announcers who read news headlines. But there really wasn't a
lengthy newscast.
A newscast where an anchor sat in a studio and switched to reporters in the field. That concept had not yet been invented. So on March 13th, 1938, Murrow finally got his way. Paley caved. They did one newscast. Robert Trout, a nice young staff announcer in New York, anchored the broadcast, switched to Ed Murrow and other hastily hired reporters in Europe, and they covered the Nazi invasion of Austria.
This is Edward Murrow speaking from Vienna. It's now nearly 2:30 in the morning, and Herr Hitler has not yet arrived. No one seems to know just when he will get here, but most people expect him sometime after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's of course obvious after one glance at Vienna that a tremendous reception is being prepared.
Now the phones lit up. People loved it. They thought it was the greatest thing they'd ever heard. So they did it again. And then they did it again.
They didn't love the content.
They didn't love the content, but the concept of hearing voices of people who are actually watching the news was really an interesting concept to a lot of people. So the program was so successful, they did it the next night and the next night and the next night, and it's still on the air today. It's the CBS World News Roundup, which is on every morning at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Pacific Time, and it's been on the air since 1938.
Isn't that amazing?
It really
How do you
is.
see radio changing? You know, we always talk about new media and the internet and all that. Are you all wrestling with the same issues, or is radio in some ways immune to that competition because of its very nature?
It is
because
not
you can't
immune.
really, but you can't really be looking at your computer while you're driving, right?
You cannot. But instead of listening to the radio, you can be listening to an iPod, you can be listening to satellite radio, and someday I think you can be listening to a radio over a cell phone. So the business is changing very, very quickly.
How are you all dealing with it?
Well, we're doing podcasts, as is the television side. We're looking at opportunities to provide content to other emerging technologies. We produce the content. We're the journalists. We're the experts on that. We're the writers and the reporters and the correspondents. And perhaps we can take that same base of information and give it to people in other means.
But just for me, and you've been in the business just a bit longer than I have, but my head sometimes feels like it's spinning when I think about how this whole medium has changed so dramatically.
Sure. I remember it was not all that long ago when the radio stations that make up this radio network were connected by essentially telephone lines. And if we had a baseball game on the radio network, the World Series, we couldn't do a newscast. Now we can do 12 different programs at the same time. They're all on a satellite, and the radio station just picks whatever it is it wants.
The wonders of modern technology. All right, well, you better get back to work,
Okay.
right, Charlie?
You bet.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
See you later.